I'm typically writing behind like a computer and people don't see me, or they might meet me over Zoom for like 5 minutes or something like that, and I'm not the type of person who hops online to share my thoughts. So it's a little bit stressful to be doing this, but I have good intentions, I promise, and other ideas about pop culture issues and things that kind of pop up to me in the night that I start writing out, and then I find that it has nowhere else to go. So it's gonna go here. Yeah. Hi, y'all. My name is Danielle. I've been hesitant to start a channel because I've been hyper aware of the fact that something like 20 million videos are uploaded to YouTube every day, and I feel pretty weird about contributing to that. I've been thinking, like, what do I have to say? What do I have to offer? However, while I've learned to stop quitting my day jobs, which I do a lot, I am a writer at the end of the day, so I've been trying to get back into the flow of doing something that I actually care about, and I have not been writing as of late. I haven't felt inspired. Nobody is paying me. Sometimes work I've toiled away at for a really long time finds a small audience where it doesn't find one at all. And it can feel thankless, and it made me stop writing. So I'm trying to figure out a way to get back into it while doing something I care about. Arguably, we should be making art for art's sake, but I do feel like all art these days is feeding something bigger than ourselves, and it has very little return. So, call me transactional, but I think we should get something out of our creativity, inspiration, money, attention. So a YouTube channel is a compromise for all of that at the moment. It reaches a much wider audience than most other platforms, and I can still do my little think pieces, just now it's video essays, or my fiction work is storytelling. And making videos requires me to be creative in order to earn the attention that I'm so desperately seeking on my work. So there you have it. A win-win, and that's why I'm here. A hesitation, and a little fear, is how much my voice and face and words might be scraped for non-human purposes. I was going to use the other word, but I can't wait around for that to disappear in order to get stuff out. And I'm just charging ahead now and biding my time until the world realizes they would rather have normal feeling temperatures for the summer as opposed to like instant gratification. But I do welcome advice on how to prevent stolen work, so please let me know your ideas if you can sage those worries or have saged those worries for yourself on your own channel. Anyway, to share a little bit about myself in a personal sense, I do have a website that I've kept around as a sort of resume for a few years because I both hate LinkedIn with a fiery passion, but I also miss Tumblr, So this is a nice little mix of those two things. You're welcome to visit that to learn some more about me, but to summarize, in undergrad I was a double major in English and Africana Studies with a journalism minor. I dropped out of my creative writing MFA some years later. We'll talk about that another time. I have moved around a lot, chasing jobs and education and love, so I have approximate knowledge of multiple cities all over the US. I'll talk more about myself over time, eventually, if it pertains to the lore of the video that I'm making. Okay. You'll also notice that I'm attempting to make this channel kind of sultry and like late night radio energy, but that's for a reason. It's because making things curated in a certain way makes me feel calm and focused. I'm a funny person. I have severe ADHD. I'm really obnoxious sometimes. I bounce off the walls, but there's a lot of content out there that's way too much for me. I'm usually watching videos while I'm getting ready for bed or hanging with my dog on a day off or something. So I wanted to make what I hope to see more of. I'm not interested in high energy, purposely upsetting, shock value content. I also can't promise to keep people emotionally regulated the whole time, but my goal is to make people think calmly, like a radio host. Basically the opposite of whatever you feel when you're scrolling. That's my goal for this channel. All right, that all being said, let's jump into the first episode. Life has been really intense lately. Scary, if you will. It has probably always been like this, and I just was too young to notice as a kid. But as an adult, my fears are not divorced from the current political climate. I've had friends in the past who've been able to do that. They act like the price of gas is not directly tied to war, it's just inflation. Or like their difficulty in getting, maybe keeping a job wasn't because of racist or sexist hiring practices. It's a difficult market for everyone. Or like who they actively choose to love and give attention to and a desire hasn't been the reason why dating is so difficult for them. I just haven't found the right person yet. May of 2026 marked the publication of an article I wrote for a literary magazine called Majuscule. I've written for them before about my love for like the silly side of animation. And this experience was just as great. I enjoyed a lot of their other pieces as well. I don't think I've ever worked on a piece as long as I have this one. I wrote the first draft of this piece at a time where I felt pretty loving and enlightened and generally more kind than I feel at this exact moment. But I had a great editor who challenged me when I wasn't feeling so high and mighty, so the final changes feel pretty authentic. I'm happy to have it out in the world, and I encourage you to read the whole thing, and I'll link it in the description. But for now, I'll hit on some key points. Last spring, I threw out so many headlines, the fires taking place, and I was in LA at the time, and it was really nerve-wracking. People getting kidnapped off the streets, more murders. I had a thought about what was occurring right in front of us all. Assholes were leading us down a dark path even further. And the role that we all play in propping them up, myself included, became much clearer to me. Everybody is so unnecessarily mean, and they're rewarded for it. I do feel a little silly, naive, whiny, whatever you want to call it, reducing the result of years of systemic oppression to just meanness. But I'm not really sure what else to call it when that is what it is. I didn't write that piece to make people feel bad about every little thing they do. And I mentioned that at the beginning of the work, I think. It's not helpful anyway. It was written to encourage people to feel more aware of their own actions. Before people start, what's the term, bean souping? Before people start bean souping and talking about how they're neurodivergent, which I am also, or just having a bad day, or nobody owes you kindness, etc., etc. Just know I'm not talking about accidental or awkward social interactions or unintentional attitudes or scenarios where if you weren't mean, you'd be in danger or taken advantage of. I'm talking about purposeful, unnecessary meanness. And if you're hearing me in good faith, you know exactly what I'm talking about. And you know the difference. People going out of their way to say rude things to other people, you know what I'm saying? To try to put somebody in their place, to roll their eyes when someone's talking, and do whatever they can to make somebody feel small. And as a neurodivergent person myself, I think there's also a line between I didn't mean to do that, that was an accident, oh my gosh, oops, how awkward, versus we really should be learning to better understand social cues so that we can be better to each other. That's part of the human condition, is to learn how to be more human. Does that make sense? Like, we need to learn from each other. I hope that makes sense. This is editing Danielle from the future. I felt like I didn't touch on this deep enough in the original recording, so I'm just sliding this thought in here now. What I've been trying to say here is that there are a lot of bots online that were trained on a lot of racist, sexist, offensive drivel of some sort. And they learned that doing those things and saying horrible things to minorities online can agitate people enough to get engagement. And then at the very far end of things, they learn that if they make these fake accounts with AI-generated vulnerable populations of people who are like, oh, please buy my art because, nobody wants to buy from me as a Black woman or a disabled person or something weird like that, they learn that that also gets engagement. So I just find that, like, if we are to be more human, we need to be, sure, disagreeing with each other online, but with a humanness so that we can distinguish each other from those fake beings, if that makes sense. That was the thought I was trying to make on social media and whatnot. And also, just generally, the thesis here is just this idea that we are helpless against injustice and what can we do was so frustrating to me that that's where this article came from. Because there's so many things you can do to make sure harm isn't normalized. It costs $0 and 0 cents to be nice, but it'll cost us everything eventually if we're not. Okay, a content warning here for abuse and murder. This is gonna be a lot of reading, so I'm gonna be looking down a lot, and I hope it doesn't look too bad. So, 2 events in 2025 influenced this piece. I'm not a true crime writer. This was just something I felt moved by. It's a disturbing story of a 24-year-old trans man from Red Wing, Minnesota, lured into a pretty sick situation that led to his death. His name was Sam Nordquist. He was tortured and murdered at the hands of his girlfriend, quote unquote, Reed abuser, who recently pled guilty in this case and is facing, as of this recording, life in prison without parole. 2 other accused have also pled guilty to avoid trial and harsher sentencing, but there are 7 total people charged and being tried separately. There were other folks involved, but they were minors. I go into as much detail as I can handle in the writing, but it was a pretty mentally triggering case. I've also moved for someone I believe loved me, but ended up putting me in an uncomfortable, hostile situation alongside their family members. It wasn't to this extent by any means, but my safety and housing were in that person's hands, and they knew it, and they took advantage of that. I loved them, and I entrusted them with my well-being, which is something I've learned to never do again. So when it became clear that this person had no intent on protecting me, I realized how vulnerable of a situation I was in and how south it could have went. So yeah, Sam's case was pretty upsetting. Thankfully, I didn't come across a whole lot in my research, the same way I have overwhelmingly seen for Nolan Wells. A bunch of victim blaming. People seem to know where to place it, but it also could have been because Sam's murderers are pleading guilty so far. I've wondered a lot what the hell would make people do something like that, torture someone who was in love with you. And all I could think was that these people were empowered by a transphobic, homophobic world to do harm. They likely believed they would find empathy in whatever crusade they had going on in their heads, and I'm sure they have. Additionally, the second event that influenced me to write this, and ties directly into Sam's case, explained pretty clearly where that expected sympathy might come from, and I think it's what we consume. So as someone into screenwriting, and with my current day job in entertainment, I pay pretty close to award season for multiple reasons. And something that stood out to me and a lot of other writers was the speech during the 2025 WGA Awards, the Writers Guild of America Awards, from the Breaking Bad creator, Vince Gilligan. He's now being praised for Pluribus, and he had just won an achievement award for his contributions to television writing.
As a writer, speaking to a room full of writers, I have a proposal. It certainly won't fix everything, but maybe it's a start. I say we write more good guys. For decades, we've made the villains too sexy. I really think that. When we create characters as indelible as Michael Corleone, or Hannibal Lecter, or Darth Vader, or Tony Soprano, viewers everywhere, all around the world, they pay attention. They say, man, those dudes are badass. I want to be that cool. When that happens, fictional bad guys stop being the cautionary tales that they were intended to be. God help us, they become aspirational. So maybe what the world needs now are some good, old-fashioned, greatest generation types who give more than they take, who think that kindness, tolerance, and sacrifice aren't strictly for chumps.
I realized the irony, considering that Vince wrote the character of Walter White, a villain to say the least. But maybe he felt so guilty over his past choices that he had an epiphany after seeing who people chose to uplift compared to literally any other character, because the speech slaps, you know? Another thought I had was that I wanted to clarify how I'm not praising Vince's speech to celebrate purity culture or anything like that. In fact, his use of the phrase good old fashioned gave me a little bit of pause, because that in my mind connects to good old boys, and that's not what I'm talking about at all. I don't think he meant to say that either, but that's where that went for me. And I'm just careful to commend any sort of conservative message. Not saying that he has that message at all, but I think it was just vague enough that it could be interpreted that way. But anyway, I just felt like if people consider, for example, queer people or black people to be villains in some capacity, and they're nodding along to the speech, that's not what I'm talking about by any means, and I don't think that's what he's talking about either. But yeah, just the good guys he's talking about, meaning good folks who help other people and not a certain demographic of people who used to live in the heyday of time. You know what I'm saying? And going back to a certain era where things were just right back then. I don't think that's what he means. And that's not how I'm interpreting it. Romanticizing and teaching young people and writers to romanticize villainous behavior makes it so that we get an endless slew of folks being proud and teaching others to be avoidant, and then subsequently proud to not investigate their own behavior, and then proud to be bad or uncaring people, and then proud to be scary or physically harmful. You see where I'm going with it? Like, it's endless, and it starts with meanness and seeking out power through that meanness. Lee Harper's To Kill a Mockingbird, question mark. Maya Angelou's I Know Where the Cage Bird Sings. Anyone? Bueller? Something else I forgot to touch on in the written piece is another third thing, which is the start of the pandemic in 2020, and how that has also influenced our social, or antisocial rather, behavior. It was very important then, and frankly I still think it is. I could be doing a better job of masking. That we masked up and kept our social distance from one another in order to protect ourselves, but that also meant that a lot of people became insular and paranoid, including myself. Fast forward a few years later, and now a lot of those same people use bots to write emails and talk them through arguments with their friends and partners. Some people have romantic relationships with beings that can't push back or challenge them. I think I was going to say something else. And that makes for a weird dynamic, right, in your love life. We don't know how to interact with one another as well as we used to, and we barely did before. But that being said, it is our duty to remember how, to improve how, especially when we have children watching us. I don't have kids, and I've been on the fence about having them, but I do think about this a lot. What is it like to be from a generation where you had to stay away from people for maybe half your life or so for your own safety? And now proximity to those same people feels threatening. Anyway, all of this, intentional pushes for power, the fear of connection, and I would argue the desire to never experience vulnerability or weakness, which feels like a combination of the two, to be honest, has made for some really weird behavior, and I think that has resulted in some extreme unnecessary meanness. I feel like I sound so whiny or naive, but we as a collective are in danger. And things will and have continued to get worse the meaner people get. Period. Anyway, I struggled to write that article and this video essay because, believe it or not, I've been bullied a lot. And I don't want to help my bullies. Like, I used to try. I participated heavily in that window between the murders of Trayvon Martin and George Floyd, where it felt like putting out the right article would open the eyes of like the most curmudgeonly racist you could think of. And Toni Morrison says, racism is a distraction. So it leads you to keep trying to prove how much of a human being you are when that's not important because you just are. I am fat and black and queer, so you will hear me talk a lot about the many types of harm I've experienced, because unfortunately that's been the lens through which I view my life. Each act of harm I experience makes me want to be even more mean and vitriolic than the original source, because the alternative, never speaking up at all, is appealing, but I have a lot I'd like to do and participate in, and I don't want to stop living my life because people just don't want to hear me speak. So while I've been personally targeted and I remember every incident, I do overwhelmingly believe that the pain I've experienced has been systemic. Folks are internalizing the world order they believe they were taught and agreeing to stick to it, whether or not it benefits them. And sometimes even when it doesn't, which is how we end up with inter-community issues, pick-me's, coons, sellouts, whatever you want to call it. People who think that if they just serve the injustice long enough, it'll pay off. So yeah, I don't want my old bullies coming out of the woodwork and to say they're healed. I don't want to put on a show for people who will never, no matter what they go through, see me as their equal. I don't want to beg for kindness. Pretty much the only thing that has ever brought me satisfaction, actually, with unnecessarily mean people is knowing that they're like suffering spiritually, because there's no way you're happy inside when you act like that. But all of that being said, and here's where I feel Toni is rolling in her grave, because it really does feel like going out of your way to care about the lives of people who look down at you. I'm just aware that change in others and myself is possible and necessary. And it's up to me to make choices that don't align with harmful people in order to move the needle. So I don't have a choice but to be nice. Obviously I do. And I want to be really mean sometimes. And I have been and can be. But I try super hard to be nice because it would change the world. And that sounds so like, what does she say from Mean Girls?
I just wish we could all get along like we used to in middle school. I wish that I could bake a cake made out of rainbows and smiles and we'd all eat it, be happy.
She doesn't even go here.
Like, that's how I feel. It's so frustrating because, like, we have to do it. Can you realize the paradise that we would live in if people work together? We have so many resources. Like, we will be okay. There's more than enough to satisfy all the people that live on this fucking planet. But I feel crazy because, I don't know, like, I'm not the first person, obviously, to be saying all of this. What I'm trying to say is that we are all contributing to something really bad when we could be contributing to the beautiful paradise that is Earth. God. And I don't know why I feel so weird saying that, because it's true. Sometimes when you're nice, people are suspicious of you, and that's really bad as well, because it's like, is kindness so rare to you that it feels like a scary thing? And also, people use kindness and niceness to lure people into situations because they know it's so rare. And if we were all much nicer, it would be a lot less confusing to come by because you would know a genuine type of niceness when you experience it. Okay, I hope that makes sense. I'm struggling so bad with this because the idea that I'm even freaking out about it, like that optimism as a whole is a bad thing or a falsehood of some sort, it's just a sign of the times. I don't know what to tell y'all. That's the thesis. If we don't start being nice to each other, like, we can just kind of kiss the world goodbye. Damn, that sounds so bleak. Anyway, thanks for rolling with me while I figure this out. This is all very new to me and a little bit stressful. I'm typically writing behind like a computer and people don't see me, or they might meet me over Zoom for like 5 minutes or something like that, and I'm not the type of person who hops online to share my thoughts. So it's a little bit stressful to be doing this, but I have good intentions, I promise, and other ideas about pop culture issues and things that kind of pop up to me in the night that I start writing out, and then I find that it has nowhere else to go. So it's gonna go here. Yeah. Okay, thank you. And yeah, I did it.